Who is God's chosen one? In a world that often seems chaotic, where virtue is not always rewarded and faith can be tested by adversity, a disquieting question naturally arises. Is there someone who is special to God? Is there a divine favor that falls upon some, a particular attention that not everyone attains? Psalm 4, in its third verse, answers this question with a declaration of profound security and discernment. But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. This passage, which springs from David's soul in a context of opposition and conflict, as we saw in the preceding verses, is not an arrogant presumption. On the contrary, it is an affirmation of faith and a deep knowledge of God's nature. David does not boast of his own godliness, but recognizes a divine principle. God has a special care and singular attention for those who revere him, who live in righteousness and seek to please him. And the direct consequence of this relationship is the certainty that their cry will be heard. It is a promise that sincere devotion does not go unnoticed in the eyes of the Most High, God's distinct gaze, but know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The word godly here goes far beyond simple external religiosity. In the biblical context, to be godly in Hebrew hasid means to be loyal, faithful, devoted, righteous, and kind, especially in relation to God and his commandments. It is a quality of character that manifests in a life of integrity, reverence, and love. The idea that the Lord has set apart for himself means that God has an intimate relationship and particular care for these people. It is not arbitrary favoritism, but a response to how they position themselves before him and live their lives. It is as if God acknowledges them, takes them for himself in a special way, watching over them. Let's think about Donna Alzira's story. In her early 70s, she was always known in her small town for her unwavering kindness, her honesty in all dealings, and her dedication to helping those in need, never expecting recognition. She was a woman of simple yet profound faith. In a community where many complained about difficulties, Donna Alzira found reasons to be grateful. When tragedy or gossip spread, she was the voice of calm, hope, and reconciliation. She wasn't rich, she didn't have grand titles, but her life emanated a different light. In a moment of personal crisis, her beloved grandson was going through a period of deep rebellion, causing her great pain. Donna Alzira felt the weight of anguish. Many said, "Alzira, you did everything right," but he chose his own path. It was easy to feel helpless, to question her own worth or the effectiveness of her faith. However, she remembered that verse from Psalm 4. She knew in her heart that the Lord had set her apart for himself, not because she was perfect, but because of her constant pursuit of godliness, justice, and love for her neighbor, even amidst her own flaws. This certainty gave her inner peace, a resilience that allowed her to continue praying and loving, even when the situation seemed unfavorable. She knew that in God's eyes, her life of faith did not go unnoticed. It was valued and cared for in a singular way. This setting apart for God is not exclusivity, but the recognition of a special relationship built on devotion and mutual trust. The dialogue of trust. The Lord hears when I call to him. The second part of the verse is the logical consequence and the comforting promise of the first. If the Lord has set apart for himself the godly, then it is natural that he hears them. The Lord hears when I call to him is the certainty that the prayer of the righteous, the faithful, the devout is not merely listened to, but attended to with attention and readiness. It does not mean that all prayers will be answered exactly as we desire, but that they reach God's ears and he will act according to his wisdom and his love. It is the promise of an open and effective channel of communication. Let's think about Mr. Benedito's story. He was a retired teacher, known for his patience and for dedicating hours to advising young people and adults seeking direction in life. He always sought to live with integrity, to be just in his words and actions. However, he faced a serious problem, a chronic illness that severely limited his mobility and caused him constant pain. On many mornings, the simple act of getting out of bed was an immense challenge, and the pain led him to discouragement. On one such day, feeling exhausted and questioning whether he could continue his work of supporting others, Mr. Benedito sat in his favorite chair and his voice, choked with pain, cried out to God. He remembered all the times he had sought to live righteously and how he had always felt God's hand in his life. He cried out, not for a miraculous cure that would free him from all pain, but for strength to bear it, and for a way to continue to be useful. He knew that the Lord had set him apart in his journey of faith, and because of that, trusted that he would be heard. The answer came unexpectedly. A former student who became a physiotherapist contacted him and, learning of his condition, offered to adapt his exercises and even help him find ways to continue giving his advice virtually. Mr. Benedito realized that the Lord had heard him. The sustenance was not the removal of the illness, but the ability to deal with it in a new way, the discovery of a new tool to continue his purpose. His prayer was heard, and the blessing manifested in new possibilities and the renewal of his life's mission, even with physical limitations. It is the certainty that communication with God is real and that He acts in response to faith and godliness, the essence of godliness and its rewards. Psalm 4:3, therefore, presents us with a profound and encouraging truth about the relationship between God and humanity. It teaches us that godliness, this genuine loyalty and devotion to God, manifested in a life of integrity and kindness, is not in vain. On the contrary, it establishes a special connection with the Creator, a setting apart that guarantees His attention and care. This verse is an invitation to cultivate genuine godliness, seek a life of righteousness, honesty, compassion, and reverence for God, not out of obligation, but from a sincere love and desire to please Him. Trust in God's discernment. Know that He sees the heart and recognizes those who seek Him sincerely, even if the world does not perceive them. Call out with confidence. Be certain that by living in godliness, our prayers do not fall into emptiness, but are heard by a God who cares and responds. This is a message of hope for those who strive to live a life of faith in a challenging world. It reaffirms that there's a purpose in seeking righteousness and that this pursuit is not ignored by heaven. Selah, the pause for the truth of divine intimacy. And to conclude this significant declaration of faith, the word Selah invites us once again to a reflective and profound pause. After the powerful affirmation that God sets apart the godly for Himself and hears their cry, Selah compels us to internalize this truth. It is an invitation to pause and consider the magnitude of this promise of divine intimacy and attention. Do you recognize yourself as someone who seeks godliness in your life? Can you feel the assurance that you are set apart for God's special care? Have you called out to Him with the certainty that your voice will be heard? Selah encourages us not just to read about David's experience, but to embrace it as our own. It's a call to take a deep breath, to strengthen our faith in the conviction that our relationship with God is personal, real, and deeply meaningful. May the certainty of being set apart by God inspire us to live in greater godliness and to cry out to Him with the confidence of beloved children, knowing that He will always hear us.